Hi everybody, welcome to 2 Off the First. It is July the 18th, 2023. It is Tuesday of Open Championship Week. I'm Ryan Balaji. It's great to have you here with us. We are presented by our friends at Swannies. Get all of the latest, greatest golf apparel from Swannies at swannies.co, including the shirt you're seeing if you're watching the video version of this show. They also have just introduced t-shirt hoodies, which, if you'll ask my wife, is one of my favorite things in my closet because it is. We've got some great slogans, printed graphics on them. Check them out at swannies.co, as well as great hoodies, polo shirts, pullovers, and shorts. Also, we are getting so much closer to our Ireland trip. Take off on August 30th. We are having this trip presented by Club Choice Ireland. Head to clubchoiceireland.com and you can find out more about their group journeys. You can schedule an individual consultation with them to figure out your own trip, with whether it's a small group, big group, and you can also do package tours with them as well at clubchoiceireland.com. Now, two stories for today. One relates a little bit to LIV and Jay Monahan coming back to work this week, and the other actually gets to the heart of the championship this week, the main one at least. We have the Barracuda Championship, which is the Stableford event out in California, but the main event obviously is the one that happens sooner, which is the Open Championship. Final men's major of the year. Royal Liverpool Golf Club hosts for the third time in the major modern era, basically since 1964. And you have two winners from 2006 and 2014 who are all-time greats, right? You've got Tiger Woods, who won here when the conditions were bone dry, didn't need a driver, but once the entire week, avoided every single bunker. It was incredible. And probably his most emotional, at least outwardly, major championship win, his first major championship since his father Earl passed away. Then in 2014, you had Rory McIlroy win, to date, his only Open Championship, his third major title, which set up a beautiful sandwich of major wins between the Open and the PGA just a month later at Valhalla, and then in between won a WGC. So those conditions that year were much more benign, more like a kind of standard parkland course, not particularly windy, not necessarily all that warm either, but plenty of scoring under par in both instances. And if you look at the scoring in the Open Championship this century, and you look at 2006 and 2014 at Liverpool, the only course that has seen scoring lower is the 2016, which is Troon, when you had Henrik Stenson set what is the 72-hole scoring record, and also looking at last year at the old course when Cam Smith got to 20 under par. Both those cases, 20 under par won. This is a par 71 this week, 20 under par in both of those. Obviously a little bit different, 4 strokes more over the course of 4 rounds. So this is a golf course that is susceptible to giving up birdies. However, we have an interesting and slightly different finish this year, and that's the subject of our first topic today, which is the controversial finish at Royal Liverpool. So Royal Liverpool has been routed a little bit differently this time and compared to what you would typically see if you were a member. So some of the holes are a little bit out of order, and so the 17th and 18th holes are an interesting par 3, par 5 finish. Now, 17 is a par 3 that's about 138 yards. It is a new hole. It's basically kind of a postage stamp style hole, playing into the ocean or into an ocean view. Very small target, lots of nasty bunkers around. Basically, you got to hit the green, or there's a really good chance you can make 4, 5, 6 if you leave in the bunkers a couple of times or hit some poor shots. And then 18 is different from 2014 in that the driving area is a little bit smaller, and the internal out of bounds that functions up the right side is bigger and comes in further into the hole than it did in the past. So for players who need to make a score on the final hole, I mean, everyone needs to make a score, but really need to make a score to make up some ground, they're going to have to challenge more internal out of bounds. And you might wonder why that exists. So the internal out of bounds is really a thing that tends to happen to these open rotation courses. And it's not necessarily because, like at the PGA Championship, where they wanted to prohibit a player from going a particular route at Oak Hill, and it's not necessarily even a player safety issue, which is kind of what the PGA of America posited it as when they put that internal out of bounds at Oak Hill. Rather, this is kind of a historical thing. So a lot of these properties, a lot of the open rotation properties, they didn't own the entire property for whatever reason. Maybe something was next to it. Maybe something in it, they didn't own all of it. So they created internal out of bounds as a way to line the property markers, not necessarily just to create a penalty. So for example, here at Royal Liverpool, used to be a racetrack to the right. And so the club didn't own that property. Now that property is part of the practice facility, driving range. So they own it, but historically that has been out of bounds. So they have kept it that way. And there's a lot of debate about internal out of bounds, whether it's a good idea, whether it's a bad idea, whether it should be yellow stake instead. And frankly, it doesn't, I mean, it functions kind of the same way on this hole because you're going to have to carry a whole lot of stuff, and the more you go right, obviously, off the tee, the more likely you're just going to find out of bounds right away. But at least if it were a yellow stake, you'd be able to find, an entry point, I suppose. But that is not the case here, right? It's just stroke and distance. Are you in bounds or are you out? So that's going to require a player to hit a little bit better of a drive, a little bit more of a less aggressive drive, frankly, the way the hole is shaped. And that has drawn some controversy. So some of the players in the field have been asked about this. Jon Rahm was asked about 17. He talked a little bit about that. And Scottie Scheffler was asked about 18 and 17. So let's talk about what Scheffler said. He was asked, what have you made about the specific facets of this course, particularly the new 17th? Scheffler said, the one thing I've noticed about this golf course is anytime my ball is going towards the bunker, I'm very nervous. I'm just going to try and avoid the bunkers at all costs. That was Wood's strategy in 2006. For good reason. The bunkers were the defense of the golf course. I feel like at St. George's, a lot of the bunkers had a tiny bit of upslope before you got to the wall face. And here, it seems like the faces of every bunker is almost a downslope going toward it, which is pretty nasty because that means it can get closer to the wall and make it almost impossible to get out, right? These sodded walls that you're going to see a lot of over the course of the week. I don't think that's something I particularly like in a golf course. I think it doesn't reward the good shots as much. If you're closer to the green, you end up closer to the lip. And if you get a worse shot and barely get into the bunker, then you actually have a play, which that's an interesting comment. And I know this isn't necessarily about the 17th hole. He gets to this in a minute. But the way he thinks about what should be a good shot and what should be a bad shot, closer to the green's better than closer to the front edge of the bunker. Well, that's not necessarily the case because remember, you're trying to avoid the bunker. They don't want you to go in the bunker. They want the bunker to be a penalty. They want you to work around it or over it. So if you hit short of it and it just kind of trickles in, maybe that's a bad break, and that's why you have a better lie as opposed to if you just blast it right in there, well, maybe you deserve a worse lie because you hit it right in there. You weren't particularly careful or you didn't control your distance especially well. So it's almost the opposite of what he's saying in terms of design. And I think that's an interesting perspective from a professional golfer, especially in the modern era where you've got to hit driver very often. You're trying to go as far as you can. You're trying to be particularly aggressive. So thinking it's a good shot because you hit it farther instead of thinking, oh, well, I barely got into the bunker. I deserve a better result. And you don't deserve anything in any of these bunkers anyway. Anyway, closed out by saying, so I would prefer if there were a little bit of slope there. But that's what's so special about the majors. Every golf course is different. It's a challenge. I'm going to try to do my best and stay out of them. And then commentary on 17 says, that's another one of those holes. I was talking to a few of the guys earlier today. There's not really a high percentage play. You just have to hit a really good shot. And if you don't, I would say missing it left of the green is a little bit better than right. That bunker is pretty treacherous on the right. But as far as that hole goes, I'm just going to try and hit a really good shot. And that's pretty much all you can do. And we've seen in the weather forecast that Thursday, Friday, and Saturday are going to be pretty windy. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are going to be fairly wet. This is not going to be sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows kind of open. You're going to have winds consistently 10 to 15 miles per hour every day. It's going to be 15 to 20 most days, 3 of the 4, and then 25 mile per hour gusts, if not higher, on at least a couple of those days. Probably the first 3 days you'll see that. So on a hole like 17 where it's a small target and you got to hit a great shot, it could be a total bloodbath out there. It could be very difficult, and it's probably going to get a lot of complaints over the course of the week. But at the same time, everyone's got to play it. Everyone's got to make the best of what they can do with it, and they're going to have to just kind of figure that out as we go. There was some question about 17 for Jon Rahm as well, and he kind of seemed a little bit more understanding. We'll talk a little bit more about some comments Rahm made in his news conference regarding Jay Monahan, but the comments that he made about 17 I think are interesting. He's a very thoughtful guy. I think, frankly, among the players that have regular news conferences as the top players in the world, you want to look at McIlroy, you want to look at Jon Rahm as your two favorites. Cam Smith gives some good answers. Brooks gives some testy answers. They're kind of interesting. They're revealing if you think about them a little bit. But I think Rahm is my favorite. And then you probably want to talk about Max Homa gives some great answers. But of the guys who are playing their best right now, you want to hear from Rahm. And Rahm says, 17, well, I see what they tried to do. The old 15, par 3, was the complete opposite of the hole. You have a short downhill hole, most likely downwind, with basically all the edges sloping toward the center of the green. I thought it was a good hole. You could make a birdie, and if you missed the green, a bogey was lurking. This time, they made a really difficult turtle shell par 3. If you hit a good shot, put it on the green, you have a clear look at birdie. If you miss the green, you have a clear look at bogey. It's hard to say anything is fair or unfair because it's so short. I would say that it's fair because it's unfair to everybody. It's golf. It's life. It's simple as that. We all have to play the same holes. If you hit a good shot, you'll definitely, most likely, have a birdie chance. If not, you'll deal with it. I get you're going for that on a championship Sunday. You have a one-shot lead. That hole can be pivotal. And he's not saying the 17 is unfair. He's saying it's fair because if it's unfair to everybody. It's the same hole for everybody. So he's just kind of living with it. And I think that's one of those comments where you're like, okay, I mean, I kind of get what you're saying, but he doesn't seem like a particular fan of this. I think he liked the way it used to be. Obviously, we don't have that now. And again, a lot of these guys are going to have to deal with it. Colin Morikawa came through, wasn't even asked about 17. So maybe that kind of was a rally killer, so to speak. 17, he played 9 holes, but he hasn't played 17 yet, so he hasn't even seen that. But he will say this. He thinks it's an interesting hole. Depends on the wind. If you get a crosswind there, it could be pretty interesting. I'm a big believer in the short par 3s. Make it difficult, exactly like that. I'm not a huge fan of 260, 250 yards par 3s. Kind of takes, I don't want to say the excitement out of it, but it's kind of boring. You already know it's a 3-iron and everybody's hitting to the same spot where I think all the best par 3s in the world that have ever been designed are 165 yards or shorter. And I totally agree with that take with Brooks Koepka. 12th at Augusta, Sawgrass, I mean, postage stamp. There's a bunch of them. You can walk away with a 5 just as easily as you could make birdie. I like it. He thinks he's going to hit a 9-iron in there. So I think that the finish is going to be controversial this week. There's probably some feeling out process here, but 17 and 18 are going to create some balloon scores at some inappropriate times for players, and I think that's going to make a little bit of controversy here this week. So, all right, second story. Let's talk a little bit about Jay Monahan coming back to work. I want to focus a little bit on some comments from Jon Rahm, and then I want to touch a little bit on some comments from Brooks Koepka about Greg Norman, which I think are just funny. I don't think they're particularly revealing, but I think they're funny. Actually, you know what? Let's start with Koepka because his comments come about Norman a little bit later on in the news conference, and he's asked in the context of what was revealed in the Senate hearing that there was this side agreement that was never apparently executed or signed, that the PGA Tour offered or wanted the Saudis to sign, that they would get rid of Greg Norman 1 month after either the execution of the agreement or after the final agreement was signed. That was never really declared, but either way, that the talking point from Ryan Price, the COO of the PGA Tour, that Greg Norman would not be necessary. He would be reassigned, kind of like Milton with the stapler to the basement in Office Space, if this thing goes through. So the question is, Greg Norman's probably going to be eased out. Do you have any feelings about that? Do you have sympathy about that? What do you think about the job he's done? Koepka was very level-headed about it because I don't think he really cares about Greg Norman. I think he is just kind of that way. They're not bros. They're not best friends. They're just kind of business affiliates, and he's there. So in that context, this answer has some interest. Like I said, it's a bunch of what-ifs and scenarios, and nothing is finalized. Until it's finalized, you don't count the winner here on Saturday just because they're at the top of the leaderboard. You wait until Sunday to find that out. When all is said and done, we'll see what happens. But I've gotten along great with Greg. Obviously, had to have more communication with him probably over the last year than I've probably had in the last 5 years previous to that. But we're down in the same area, so we always have communication. Pretty good friends with his son, Greg Norman Jr. We've been in touch for a while. And then the follow-up is, do you think Greg's done a good job? says, yeah, I mean, I think he's done fine. It's all perspective, right? A little press on the question, and said, your perspective is very interesting. He said, yeah, he's doing fine. From everybody else, it's up to them. Everybody's allowed to interpret it different ways. And I think, on one hand, Koepka's got to feel pretty happy about things, right? He made a ton of money. He still won a major championship. He basically, if things work out with this agreement, could play the PGA Tour if he wishes. If LIV doesn't go away, I could see a scenario where he just says, okay, well, I'm just going to do that because I don't have to play as often. And that actually feeds into some comments from Rahm, which now makes the order of this make a little bit more sense. So Rahm is talking about, or was asked about, Jay Monahan coming back, and, you know, is that a problem? What do you think about it? What do you think about the deal? And Rahm was one of those guys at the U.S. Open, was like, basically been blindsided. I don't know what's going on. Super critical. It's kind of tempered that a little bit. Says, you know, with Monahan coming back to work, he's asked about his opinion of him. Says, well, there's been obviously big changes for all of us. First, I'd like to say I did get a text from him, but I haven't been able to speak to him. I hope whatever he had wasn't too serious, and I hope him and his family are doing good and his health has gone back to normal. I wouldn't say it's changed. Jay has behaved so professionally and so well with me and my family. I've seen him stop to talk to my dad and my mom at a few tournaments now, and he's been really good to my family. In that sense, he's a really good man. That's all I can say. Now, as it comes to what he's been doing for us in the PGA Tour, I think he's done a fantastic job. I would say it was unexpected what happened. I think with the management of the PGA Tour, the turn they took us without us knowing was very unexpected. But I still think he's been doing a great job. And right now, after that happened, I only think it's fair to give them the right time to work things out. I still think they have the best interest of the players at heart. All we have right now, it's a framework agreement. It's an agreement to have an agreement. We really don't have anything right now to be able to say or judge what they've done. That's all they can say. I can say. He affirms that Monahan hasn't lost Rahm's trust. Says again, he still has all this time to work this agreement and basically prove that this was the right decision. And then I think one of the things that was interesting that he brought up here is that he had heard that a lot of the LIV players didn't want to come back to the PGA Tour. That maybe they were just interested in staying with LIV. And so if you had to work out a penalty process for the players that did want to come back, maybe it wouldn't have to be as extensive and thought out because there wouldn't be as many case-by-case scenarios. And we have heard this from a number of LIV players. They're happy playing less. They play 14 events. If they play the 4 majors, then that's 18 tournaments, and maybe they go find a couple of other pet tournaments. For example, Cam Smith plays the Aussie Open, the Aussie PGA, or something like that. Then that's a good year for them. They're happy at 20 tournaments. And I do find that interesting, and I think that's a negotiating tactic on one hand to go, okay, well, do you want to unite golf? You've got to agree to our demands if you're the Saudis. Not only do we have the money, but we've got a bunch of players you want back, and they don't want to play more. They want to play our tour. They're happy with that. And if they're happy with the money and they're happy with the frequency, you've got to give us a better deal. Well, that's not really true. The Saudis have the contracts. They can tell them to play 8 times, 10 times, 14 times, 20 times. It is absolutely up to them. They declare the schedule. It's part of the contract. But in terms of a negotiating chip, you go, well, all of our guys don't really want this. And they could all of a sudden say, well, yeah, we're in charge, but we got to protect our players kind of thing. That makes an interesting bargaining chip, I think. Whether that is ever used or ever applied in any way, I don't know, and I don't expect it to be. But it could be one that's worth pointing out there. But from the process, as Rahm sees it and discussed about it, of trying to get players to come back to the PGA Tour and what that penalty process might look like, well, if none of them want to come back, there's no penalties to be applied. You just keep some kind of penalty on the table and say, okay, if you want to go away from LIV and you want to play again on the PGA Tour, then you can do that. But I got to be honest with you. If you were playing on LIV and you've been playing on LIV for this season or even going back to their Invitational Series, their first season, and you've been playing in 48-player events with basically 5 or 6 players who can win, maybe week to week. And we have seen that especially the really last, 10, 12 events on LIV where you've had Dustin Johnson, you've had Brooks Koepka, you've had Taylor Gooch, you've had Cam Smith. Those are the dominant players. And really everybody else is fighting for scraps. And if you look at the depth of those fields, it's not there. There's probably 30 players in these fields that really are not competitive. And they're not competitive most times. Like sometimes they might finish in the top 15, something like that. But if you were playing for a $20 million individual purse and you only had to beat 5 or 6 guys that had a realistic chance against you, and you were just trading money back and forth with the other best players, wouldn't you stick with that instead of going back to the PGA Tour where, by the way, the designated events are the same amount of players? Yes, there's probably going to be no cut, but there's going to be more of them. They're going to be better players. The guys that are, let's say, 20th through 70th, 78th, whatever the number is, they're generally better than the worst players on LIV by a mile, which means now you've got more competition. Your earning power potentially goes down. So if you are a LIV player, you're probably not chomping at the bit to get back to the PGA Tour, given the structure that you enjoy right now. So the PGA Tour being in the position that it is, that wants to get rid of LIV. They want LIV to go away. They want to merge everything back to the Tour. And that's what they believe is one of the hallmarks of their framework agreement. I don't know about all that. I'm very curious that that piece of that has not really kind of come out yet until this week, and now it has. And I think that's something people have to think about on both sides of the equation. The players in LIV have no say. They have none. PGA Tour at least has members who can kind of influence things. They have obviously player representation on the policy board. They can torpedo this whole thing if it comes down to it. But the LIV players like where they're at. They may lose that because they have no say in it, and the PGA Tour wants it gone. So we'll see what happens there. But thought some interesting quotes from those guys about their leaders, at least currently in the process, and what they feel about them and where they go from here. That it's just all one big mystery box that we're trying to figure out day by day. But we're 2 days away from the Open. Very excited about that. Final men's major of the year. Plenty to watch. Remember, PSA, the early round, early coverage is on USA. It is not on Golf Channel. So you can watch it there. Lots on Peacock too. But remember, USA for that coverage this week. All right, we'll be back with another show tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching or listening to the show. If you're watching us either on YouTube or some other way, if you're watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing to our channel. Smash that like button, leave a comment. If you are catching us as an audio show and you're listening to us on a podcast platform, let you do that. Consider subscribing to our show. Also, you can leave a comment and leave a 5-star review. That'll help us reach more people. And if you're catching us some other way, thanks for spending a little bit of your time with us here on this Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever you're listening. I'm back tomorrow with another show. I'm Ryan Balaji. Thank you for watching or listening. We will catch you next time on 2 Off the First.